is Ginkgo Ferment. Biology is technology on steroids. It's explosive.
We're talking about our industries through the lens of biology. And with that comes a new vernacular, a new perspective, and a new attitude.
There's a lot of opportunity for us to integrate different technologies and optimize them.
We have to rely on industry in order to bring those concepts to us.
Between AI and SynBio, we're going to see a reformation of the world in ways that we don't even understand right now.
So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. This is very impressive, Jason. What a great talk. This is quite the setup.
It is. It's an exciting time. So I thought I'd start this off by talking about the first time we met. It was a dinner, I believe, a couple years ago. And I walked in, and I saw you, and somebody said, "Oh, this is Reshma." I was like, "Wait, what?" And you know, I have to say it was this surreal experience because for any of you who are a member of an underrepresented group, the idea that you would walk into a fancy dinner hosted by Linda Henry and meet somebody of the same gender, the same race, and the same name does not happen. It has never happened to me in my entire life. And so what was that experience for you?
Yeah, I certainly remember that. And I think it was 2018, maybe 2019. It was a dinner that Linda hosted for the Boston community. And it has never happened to me either. I've never been in a meeting with leaders, founders, scientists, where there's another woman named Reshma. I think it was the same year that there was a write-up after JP Morgan that said there were more Michaels at that JP Morgan than there were women. And it was on the heels of that that two Reshmas met in Boston at a dinner.
That's right. And I remember vividly coming back from that dinner, and I emailed Jason. I was like, I just met Reshma, the CEO of Vertex. And I was like, is this your life all the time? You just meet other guys named Jason who are executives of biotech companies? And Jason was like, pretty much. And I have to say, that drove home for me like nothing else, like just what inclusion means, I think, for all of us. And so it's a real amazing pleasure that 2 years later we're on this stage together.
It's very nice to be here.
What I'd love for you to share with the group here is, you know, when we I think, got together for lunch afterwards, and you told me the story of what attracted you to Vertex, and I found it absolutely fascinating, and I'd love for you to share that story with everyone here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Bombay when it was still called Bombay, and we moved here when I was 12, but I consider myself Bostonian. I trained here. I met my husband here, we had our kids here, and I was never going to leave here, and that was pretty firm. Except I see David Chang in the audience. I was lured away from Boston to a California-based company, and we were there for 14 years. And Southern California is nice. The weather is warm, the sun is almost always out, and you can go skiing if you drive 5 hours north, and you can go swimming if you go 5 hours south. So we were not moving. I was so sure we were never going to move that we bought our forever house in California. We renovated that thing for 9 months. We lived in that thing for 6 months, and then we moved to Boston. And what attracted me to Vertex was really three things. The first was this commitment to science and R&D that I had not seen before. I had worked at great companies, don't get me wrong, but at that time, the executive committee at Vertex had some 9 people on it. Approximately half were MD, PhD, or MD, PhD scientists. Most companies, Ginkgo excluded, that work in the science field may have one individual at the executive level. And I think that says something about the emphasis, the focus, the resource, and such. And that was very attractive to me. The second thing that brought me to Vertex is I thought what they did in cystic fibrosis was nothing short of amazing. So when you work in drug development, you often think about targets, right? And one of the things that just happens is whatever you started to do, it gets hard. You can't interdict on that particular target, and then you go a little upstream or you go a little downstream. And that almost always gets you a medicine that is not going to be transformative. It's not going to be curative. And I found the vision and the commitment to hitting the target, not a little bit upstream, not a little bit downstream, to be very impressive. And the last thing is it was in Boston. Unlike Chicago, New York, LA, I think Boston has this kind of ecosystem that feeds biology and biotech. The people, the hospitals, the academic centers, venture capital, policymakers, events like this bring the community together, and it drives innovation, and I wanted to be a part of that.
That's great. So speaking personally, my journey at Ginkgo has been quite a steep learning curve, as you might imagine, over the past 13 years, sort of growing from a graduate student to now an executive of Ginkgo today. And I would say that I feel a big personal responsibility to sort of keep up with that growth, like keep growing myself, keep extending myself to meet what Ginkgo's growing needs are. And so what I find fascinating about your story is you were named CEO, you were named as the incoming CEO in sort of, I think, July 2019, but you didn't actually become CEO until August 2020. So you had sort of 8 or 9 months to kind of get yourself ready, mentally prepare, and whatnot. Can you talk about what was that process like? How did you get yourself ready to become CEO of a company like Vertex?
Yeah. It's totally true. We made the announcement on July 29th of 2019, and the actual transition happened on April 1st. The company, if you know anything about Vertex, it's a very analytical company and it's a very deliberate company. So my predecessor and the board thought long and hard over a multi-year period about this transition, and part of the transition was to do it slowly. 2 things that you know about transitions, especially in biopharma, that don't really work is doing a transition at a time of weakness, when there are acute problems, when things just aren't going well. And so one of the decisions that was made is that we would do it at a moment of strength and when things were going really well. And the second thing that doesn't really work well is a quick transition. When the last guy's here on Tuesday and he's gone on Wednesday and the new one's here on Thursday, and here you go, here are the keys to the castle, go for it. That doesn't really work very well. And that's why we planned this transition. And so the plan was to go around the company, go to all of the affiliates in Europe and in Latin America, visit all of our R&D sites, externally meet with our customers, with patients, with the hospitals, and none of that happened. So what actually happened is around about January, it started to become clear, just as much as it was to Ginkgo, that there was a crisis coming, that it was going to be global, it was going to be severe, and we had to adjust to that new reality. And what actually happened is the entire focus shifted to keeping our people, our own employees and families safe, and ensuring that patients got drug. Mm-hmm. That is not what I thought I would be doing in the first year. And truth be told, there were actually 3 crises in this first year on the job. I think I've been on the job for maybe 18 months, 20 months. The first was the pandemic. The second was the murder of George Floyd and the summer of racial and social unrest that followed. And the third was the insurrection on January 6th. I didn't really think that I would reflect on my first year and talk about an insurrection. But I suppose part of your journey is the Ginkgo founding team has come to this point is that the unexpected almost certainly does happen.
Yeah. And so now that you are CEO, how do you keep growing yourself? How do you keep learning and evolving as a leader?
So for me, I love reading. and reading has been enormously helpful, and I've really enjoyed it, and I think it has been valuable as you take this new role. Part of what you need when you do a new job, and I say this as a first-time CEO, when you become CEO, people tell you what it's like to become CEO, people give you advice. There's nothing like actually sitting in the seat and being CEO. So talking to others has been incredibly helpful. Making sure you have the best team of people around you has been incredibly helpful. Working for something that you actually care about is really incredibly helpful. But there is actually nothing like sitting in the seat and doing the job.
Yeah. So as we talked about earlier, the pandemic's been a pretty unprecedented time for all of us, right? And it's caused a lot of personal stress for people, right? They're sort of balancing childcare, they're worried about their parents, they're worried about their friends and families. And so there's a lot of talk right now about the Great Resignation, right? And so what are your thoughts? Is the Great Resignation real, or is it just something that journalists talk about and to get clicks on articles? And if it is real, why do you think it's happening, and what can we do about it?
Yeah. So when I look at Vertex, and I think this is true for the Boston area companies, but probably true around the country, last year in 2020, our attrition was the lowest ever, as in the last decade. Mm-hmm. We were down below the mid-single digits. And normally in the Boston area, certainly in biotech, it runs somewhere between 12 and 14%. Yeah. So we're south of 5% last year. Yeah. Very, very low attrition. But this year, attrition has come back and resignations are real. And I think that while journalists might use a little bit of artistic license, I don't think it's that far from the truth. And when I talk to our staff and when I look at our numbers are back up to the 10, 12, 14% range. And there's definitely a COVID effect. There are people who are making life decisions around not wanting to come into work. Remote work for them. If they work at a company that is not evolving to flexible work, they are making decisions about not wanting to work at a company like that. There are people who are just making life decisions. They've always wanted to live in Alaska, and they're going to do it now because life is short and Alaska is calling. And I do think that there are a lot of people who are rethinking what do they want to do with their time. Is what they're doing actually meaningful? Is it helping humanity? Is it something that they feel proud of? And people are moving on to do other things. And so from everything that I see, the Great Resignation is here. It is not to the extent that may be written about, but I think that there is equally an opportunity for employers who want to do great work at a time like this and have a way of working with employees in a flexible way. Ginkgo and Vertex, we have a lot of manufacturing. You can't do that in your garage or in your basement. There's a lot of laboratory science. You can't do that in your garage or basement. But there are ways that are different and not the way we thought about doing work that we're experimenting with right now. And I think that that is going to bring the people back who want to work and who we would love to have work with us.
Yeah, great. So I think sort of like Vertex, Ginkgo takes a very sort of first principles approach to decision making, right? We sort of pride ourselves on looking at a problem, figuring out the right path, and not simply following the herd, right? Not doing just something because others tell us to, right? At the same time, we think it's really important to operate transparently. We value feedback from our team. That's why we have Class B shares and gave those to bioworkers, right? But now I'm finding, as a public company, there's suddenly a whole new set of stakeholders who are really interested in what we're doing, which is awesome, right? But also have opinions on what we're doing, right? And so can you talk about how you strike a balance between sort of doing what you think is right, taking the right course of action, but staying open and taking input from your various stakeholders, even when they might disagree?
Yeah. What a great question. What's the old saying? Many get advice, the but the wise get wisdom from the advice that they get. So I do think that diverse voices are important. Listening is important. But if you really peel back the onion, what we're really talking about is decision making. And if you really try to think about what is all this advice about, what are people trying to say, I think it helps to dissect it. Where is the person coming from? What are the biases that they bring to the table? And what are the outcome that they are seeking? Advice is often about influence. And you have to understand that clearly so that you can come to the decision that you want to make. And I hear you, as a publicly traded company that's vested in science, where the product cycle is long. There are short-term and long-term balances that need to be made. And I think being very concrete about the fact that both are real, both are important, can take you a long way. But when you are trying to do something innovative, which is what you are trying to do, which is what Vertex is trying to do, what it means is that no one has done it before. That's why it's innovative. And so if it sounds unlikely, if it sounds crazy, if it sounds undoable, okay, but it's only because it hasn't been done before. It means nothing about whether it can be done in the future.
And how do you bring folks along with you, right? You're making that controversial decision. How do you bring the entire Vertex team along with you?
Yeah, we're very lucky, and I suspect it's very much like this at Ginkgo and other companies that are founded by scientists. The people around us, 70% of our company work in R&D. They're physicians, they're scientists, they're committed to this course of our company's trajectory. But I do think it's very important to talk about the why. If you are talking about true innovation, something that's never been done before, you do have to be able to break it down so others can understand why you think this could work. And I certainly think showing progress along the way helps. Very hard to say you're going to do big project X. Please leave me alone. 10 years later, I'll come back and let you know if big project X worked or didn't work. While innovation is indeed big, fraught with failure and such, simple things like communicating and communicating often and early, old-fashioned as it may sound, goes a long way.
Yeah. So at Ginkgo, we're really cognizant that we are building a technology platform, and that the benefits of a technology platform can shape the world. The technology platform itself can shape the world for good or for bad, right? And how the benefits of that technology platform accrue to the world really has a big influence on that, right? And so as Jason mentioned, the folks who build the platform, use the platform, sell the platform, have an outsized influence on how that platform affects the world, impacts the world. And so we have a saying at Ginkgo, which is that we care how our platform is used, right? That we are not going to take a neutral stance when it comes to what projects go on our platform, what cell programs go on our platform, that we have to care. We don't have all the answers, but we care, right? And I would say that evolved for us in part as a reaction to seeing what was happening in the world with technology platforms in in the computing space, right? So a lot of the original social media platforms, they sort of started originally from a position of we're taking a neutral stance with respect to content. They've evolved a lot since then, right? And really come around on that, but that was their original starting position. And so to me, how do you think about these issues? How do you navigate these issues? This is a powerful technology, right? It could be used for good or not, right? And how do we bias these platforms to be used for overwhelmingly for good?
Yeah. Reshma, it's a tough question. You can see the ramifications of not thinking about this early enough in the news every day and what we see in social media and platforms that I genuinely believe were created to bring the world together, to do something positive. I believe that. I think what Ginkgo is doing is really important, which is taking a stand from the beginning and being intentional about it. But I think this is a very difficult question because it's not only dependent on Ginkgo.
Yeah.
It is dependent on the people who use the platform. It is dependent on an entire network that as it grows, which I sure hope it does, and I have every reason to believe it does, gets further and further away from the core of a group of individuals who are very intentional, who have a sense of how they want to do this. And I think you are doing the right thing by talking about it up front, having a structure and resource and investment around it. But I think this is an area to be very thoughtful about and to be very vigilant about.
Yeah.
This is not something that can be a set it and forget it.
Yeah, and I think it's in some ways playing out in the larger world, right? So a lot of companies talk about how we're sort of moving from a regime where, you know, the shareholder primacy model to one where companies more and more need to take into account all of their stakeholders because they realize their long-term success is dependent on their suppliers, their customers, their employees, their vendors, like a much larger set of constituents than simply just shareholders. How do you think about that? How do you think about, you know, that multi-stakeholder model? How do you think about balancing those short-term versus long-term interests?
Yeah. I think you're asking a very important question, and one that is fraught with controversy. I think it's pretty obvious that you have to care about the environment. You have to care about your employees. You have to care about your suppliers. You have to care about the fact that we live and work in this community. It's very hard to say, gosh, I'm going to throw up my hands as long as the company is profitable. That's all that matters. But there's a lot of space between those 2 points of views, and I think finding the balance, stakeholder map, and investment in both your shareholders and your employees and what's right for the community is something that each company is going to have to come to on their own. But I think it's pretty obvious that these extreme views, there's no place for that anymore. And I think we need to think about what the way to operate in the area that is frankly sensible is the right way to do it.
Yeah. Reshma, thank you so much for being here today. It's a real pleasure, and we're so grateful and lucky to have you on the Ginkgo board.
Reshma, thank you. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Oh, it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to see you.